Luke Harper had been riding alone across the hot Arizona desert since early morning. His horse, a sturdy brown gelding named Dusty, walked at a slow and steady pace. Luke carried a simple bedroll, a canteen of water, a rope, and an old rifle for protection. He wasn't a man who talked much or complained. Life had taught him to stay calm, keep moving, and help others whenever possible. That was the way he liked to live. The sun was high in the sky, but Luke wasn't worried. He had crossed this land many times before. He knew where the small rivers dried each summer, where the ground turned rocky, and where the cliffs formed long shadows that gave a traveler an hour of shade. He also knew when he needed to stop and rest. That afternoon, Dusty shook his head, signaling he was tired. Luke patted his neck and said softly, "All right, boy. We'll find a good place soon." As he rode toward a shallow valley filled with scrub bushes and tall grass, he heard something unusual. It wasn't the sound of wind. It wasn't a bird. It was very soft, too soft to notice. Luke stopped Dusty and listened more closely. There it was again, a faint noise, like someone struggling to breathe or whispering in pain. Luke slowly climbed off his horse. He placed his hand on Dusty's shoulder to calm him. The desert could be dangerous. Snakes, coyotes, and sometimes people who wanted trouble. Luke didn't like violence and tried to avoid it, but he was careful. He walked quietly toward the sound, stepping around rocks and thick grass. When he reached a group of bushes near a dry creek bed, he saw someone lying on the ground. At first he thought it was a child, but as he came closer, he realized it was a young Apache woman. Her dark hair was tangled, her clothes dusty. She looked weak and frightened. One of her ankles was swollen. It must have been injured while running or falling. Luke knelt down beside her. "Miss," he said softly, "are you hurt?" The girl opened her eyes slowly. She didn't speak. She only stared at him, unsure if he was friend or enemy. Luke could feel her fear. He lifted his hands to show he meant no harm. "I won't hurt you," he said gently. "I'm just trying to help." The girl tried to sit up but winced in pain. Luke quickly placed his hand near her back knot, touching her as used, showing he wanted to support her if she needed. She refused his help at first, then realized she couldn't move without assistance. Carefully, she allowed him to help her lean against a rock. Luke didn't ask many questions. He didn't want to make her uncomfortable. Instead, he checked her injury from a respectful distance. The ankle was swollen but not broken. She needed rest, water, and protection. Luke understood. Immediately that she had been running from something or someone, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out his canteen. He placed it near her hands and stepped back so she didn't feel threatened. She watched him closely, then drank slowly, her hands shaking. After a moment she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Nailin." Luke realized she was telling him her name. He nodded politely. "Nailin. It's nice to meet you. My name is Luke Harper." She didn't say more, but her eyes softened just a little. Luke looked around the area. The sun was dropping lower, and the shadows were growing longer. Soon, it would be cold and dark. This valley wasn't safe for anyone, especially someone injured. He knew that coyotes sometimes came out at night, and travelers could also stumble into danger. Luke made a decision quickly. "I'll stay here for the night," he said quietly. "Just until morning. Then, I'll help you reach someplace safer." Nellen looked at him with surprise and caution. She didn't fully trust him, but she understood she couldn't walk. Her tribe was far from here. She nodded slowly. Luke returned to Dusty and took out his bedroll. He spread it out a short distance away so Nellen would know she had her own space. He then built a small fire using dry sticks. He didn't want to make a big fire. It could attract unwanted attention. Just a small, warm one was enough to keep the cold away. Nailin watched him closely. She seemed to be studying him, trying to understand whether he truly meant well. Luke worked quietly, giving her time. When the fire was steady, he sat across from her, keeping a respectful distance. After some silence, he asked softly, "Do you have family nearby? Maybe they can come for you tomorrow." Nailin shook her head. "Far, very far." She paused, struggling to describe her situation with limited English. Trouble came. I ran, fell, could not go back. Luke didn't ask what trouble she meant. He didn't want to force her to talk about something painful. You're safe now, he said simply. For a long time they sat quietly. The desert night was peaceful, filled with the sounds of insects and distant birds. The fire flickered softly between them. Luke kept his eyes on the darkness around them, listening carefully for danger. He had been in enough difficult situations to know when to stay alert. Hours passed. The stars appeared, shining like silver dust across the sky. Naylin seemed calmer now. Her breathing was steady, and she no longer looked terrified. Once in a while she glanced at Luke, studying him again. She seemed surprised that he was still awake. "Why you stay?" she finally asked. Luke looked at the fire instead of her face. "Because you're hurt. Because it's the right thing to do." Naylin tilted her head slightly. She seemed to be trying to understand a kind of kindness she hadn't expected from a stranger. "You know, Apaches?" she asked quietly. Luke nodded. "A little. I've met a few. I've worked near your lands sometimes. I don't judge anyone by what others say." She lowered her eyes, thinking. "Many fear my people." Luke gave a small smile. "People fear what they don't understand. But fear isn't always right." Naylin didn't respond, but her expression changed. The tension in her shoulders softened. Her breathing eased again. The night grew colder. Luke stood and added a few more sticks to the fire. Naylin shifted slightly, trying to stay warm. Luke noticed, but didn't approach her. Instead, he took a spare blanket from his saddlebag and placed it near her feet. "You can use it if you want," he said gently. "But only if it makes you comfortable." Naylin looked at the blanket, then at Luke, and finally pulled it over her shoulders slowly. "Thank you," she whispered. Luke nodded. Another hour passed. Luke remained sitting upright, alert. Even when he was tired, he didn't close his eyes. Naylin noticed. "Sleep?" she asked. "No," Luke answered softly. "I'll keep watch, just in case." Naylin's eyes widened slightly. She seemed touched by his sincerity. She shifted again, adjusting the blanket, then spoke quietly. "You good, man?" Luke shook his head lightly. "I'm just a man, trying to help." The night settled deeper. A faint breeze rustled the grass. Coyotes howled in the distance, but Luke didn't move from his spot. His eyes scanned the darkness, ready for anything. Naylin slowly drifted to sleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. For the first time in days, she was no longer afraid. Luke, on the other hand, stayed awake. He didn't mind the long hours. He had protected people before, strangers, friends, and workers during cattle drives. He understood responsibility. He understood danger. And he understood the importance of doing what was right, even when no one else would ever know. As he sat there in the cool night air, Luke wondered what had happened to Naylin before he found her. He hoped she would tell him in the morning, but if she didn't, he would respect her silence. The important thing was making sure she reached safety at sunrise. The moon slowly crossed the sky. Luke kept the fire low. His hand stayed near his old rifle, but he didn't hold it unless he heard a strange noise. Every few minutes he checked Dusty, who grazed quietly nearby. By the time dawn began to rise, Luke's eyes felt heavy, but he still forced himself to stay awake. He didn't want to miss anything. When the first light touched the valley, he felt some relief. The night had been long, but peaceful. Naylin slowly opened her eyes. She looked around, confused for a moment, then remembered where she was. She saw Luke still sitting in the same place, still watching over her. "You did not sleep," she said softly. "No," Luke replied with a calm smile. "But morning is here. You're safe." Naylin sat up carefully, touching her ankle. It still hurt, but didn't feel as bad as the night before. She looked at Luke with gratitude she couldn't fully express in words. Luke poured a little water into a small cup and handed it to her. "Drink. Then we'll figure out how to get you home." She nodded. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky orange and gold, the two of them prepared for a long journey back towards safety. Neither of them knew it yet. But the night they had spent together, one stranger protecting another, would change the future of many people, not just their own lives. For now, though, it was only a quiet morning in the desert where a cowboy had done the simple, honest thing: protect someone who needed help. And that was how everything began. The morning sun spread warmth across the desert, turning the sky into soft shades of orange and gold. Luke Harper stood near his horse, Dusty, tightening the saddle straps while Naylin slowly folded the blanket he had given her. Her ankle still hurt, but the swelling had gone down a little after resting through the night. Luke walked back toward her with slow, calm steps so she wouldn't feel rushed. "You ready to try standing?" he asked gently. Naylin took a deep breath and nodded. Luke didn't move close right away. He waited until she reached out slightly, showing she needed help. Then he stepped forward, offering his arm, not touching her until she placed her hand lightly near his elbow. She used his support to stand carefully. Her ankle trembled under her weight, but she stayed upright. "You're strong," Luke said softly. "We'll take it slow." Naylin gave him a small, grateful smile. Her trust in him had grown since the night before. She could see he wasn't the kind of man who forced anything or spoke harshly. He respected her space, her culture, and her silence, with gentle movements. Luke helped her climb onto Dusty. She sat sideways so her injured ankle wouldn't be stressed. Luke tied her blanket securely behind her and made sure she was balanced. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded again. Luke began walking beside the horse, guiding Dusty with soft commands. They followed a narrow path between tall desert grass, heading toward a valley that led closer to Apache land. Luke didn't know exactly where her people were, but he planned to bring her near a known meeting point where tribes sometimes gathered as they traveled. The morning wind carried a feeling of peace. Birds flew overhead and the scent of dry earth filled the air. Naylin watched the horizon thoughtfully. She hadn't spoken much yet, but Luke didn't push her. He knew that sometimes silence helped people heal. After an hour, they stopped by a small patch of shade. Luke took out his canteen and handed it to Naylin. She drank slowly, then passed it back. He also offered her a piece of dried bread. She accepted it, holding it with both hands, as if it meant much more than a simple meal. "You helped me," she said quietly. "You stayed all night?" "You did not need to." Luke wiped sweat from his forehead and sat on a flat rock. "Sometimes people need help. If I had been injured out here, I'd hope someone would stop." Naylin looked at him for a long moment. "Many people do not stop." Luke sighed softly. "Maybe not, but I try to do what I can." They rested for a while, then continued moving. The land slowly changed from open desert to scattered trees and small hills. Around noon, they reached a narrow riverbed with clear water still flowing despite the season. Naylin watched the water carefully, almost as if she feared it wasn't real. "You can rest here," Luke told her. "We'll take our time." Dusty drank from the river while Luke filled the canteen. Naylin dipped her hands in the cool water and washed the dust from her face. She felt refreshed, comforted by the simple kindness and quiet surroundings as she sat by the river. She began speaking more freely. "My people. They ran from danger," she said softly. "There were men who wanted to take land. Some were angry. Some wanted revenge. Many things happened fast." Luke listened without interrupting. "I was helping children run to safety," she continued. Then someone shouted. Someone pushed. I fell. My ankle twisted. I tried to follow my group, but the ground was too hard. I crawled for a long time until I reached the valley where you found me.
Ow.
Luke felt a heaviness in his chest. He respected her strength. Even in pain, she had kept trying to survive. "You're brave," he said. Naylin lowered her gaze shyly. "I only did what I must." Luke didn't argue. He could see clearly that she had more courage than most people he had ever met. After resting, they continued the journey. They walked for several more hours until the sky grew pale and the wind cooled again. Luke kept checking the horizon, making sure no danger followed them. Naylin watched him carefully, noticing how natural it was for him to stay alert for her safety. By sunset, they reached a small hill that overlooked a quiet plain. Luke knew this was a place where Apache scouts sometimes traveled. He stopped Dusty and looked around. "This is as close as I can take you," he said gently. "Your people should be somewhere beyond that ridge." Nalin didn't move. She looked uncertain, almost bothered by something. "Thank you," she said softly. "For saving me?" Luke shook his head. "You fought for your own life." "I just helped a little." Nalin hesitated. She looked like she wanted to say more, but instead she slowly climbed down from Dusty with Luke's help. When her foot touched the ground, her ankle held steady. She tested it carefully and found that she could walk a few steps. Luke stepped back, giving her space. Nalin stood still for a moment, holding the blanket and looking at him. There was something thoughtful in her expression, something Luke didn't quite understand. "You are different," she said finally. "You do not judge. You do not fear my people." Luke smiled slightly. "I judge people by their actions, not by what others say." Nalin nodded slowly. "My people will remember this." Luke didn't understand the meaning behind her words, but he didn't question it. He simply tipped his hat and said, "You take care now." Nalin took a few steps away, then turned back. "You help me," she said again. "I will not forget." Luke watched her walk toward the ridge. Part of him worried about leaving her alone, but he trusted she knew her land far better than he did. Once she disappeared behind the hill, he mounted Dusty and turned west. Heading toward the town where he planned to look for work, he didn't expect to see Nalin again. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Life returned to normal for Luke Harper. He worked as a ranch hand, fixing fences, herding cattle, and gathering supplies for the ranch owner. He didn't talk much about his own past. He definitely didn't tell anyone about the night he had helped an injured Apache girl. He feared people would misunderstand or create unnecessary conflict. Luke liked a quiet life, and he kept to himself. The townspeople respected him because he never caused trouble and always did his job well. At night he often sat outside the bunkhouse, watching the stars, just like he had done the night he protected Nalin. He sometimes wondered if she made it home safely. He hoped so. Then one afternoon, something happened that shook the town. Luke was helping load hay bales onto a wagon when he heard a murmur rise through the street. People stepped out of shops. Children paused in their games. Men leaned against fences, watching the road. A group of Apache riders appeared at the edge of town. 5 men and 1 woman walking beside them. Luke froze. It was Nalin. She looked healthier, stronger, and more confident than the last time he had seen her. She walked with the pride of someone who belonged to a respected family. Her swollen ankle had fully healed, and her steps were steady. The Apache men were elders, distinguished, quiet, and serious. They carried no weapons in their hands, a sign of peaceful intention. But their presence still made the townspeople uneasy. Luke could hear whispers behind him. Why are they here? Is there trouble? What do they want? Luke stepped away from the wagon, wiping dust from his hands. He had a strange feeling in his stomach. It wasn't fear, it was confusion. Why would Nalin return to town with elders? The Apache riders stopped near the open square, and one of the elders called out calmly, "We wish to speak with Luke Harper." The entire street fell silent. Luke felt dozens of eyes turned toward him. He swallowed, unsure what to do, but stepped forward. "I'm Luke," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What's going on?" Nalin stepped closer. Her hands were folded in front of her, and she looked nervous yet determined. "You helped me," she said softly. "My people came to thank you." Luke blinked. "Thank me?" You didn't have to before he could finish. One of the elders raised his hand politely and spoke. "You saved one of our young women during a dangerous time. You showed respect, courage, and honor. We came to speak with you because great change has begun." Luke didn't understand. What change? The elder looked at Nalin, then back at Luke. "The night you protected her. Someone watched from afar. One of our hidden scouts? He saw everything." Luke felt a chill run down his arms. The elder continued, "Your actions planted the seed for something important. Something that grew in the months after." Luke looked at Nalin, trying to understand. She placed a hand over her heart. "I came because the truth must be shared," she said quietly. "The night you helped me changed many lives." Luke waited silently. Then Nayland spoke the words that stunned everyone around them. "I carry something important. Something our people will reveal soon. It is not a child. It is something greater. Something that came because of you." Luke felt the entire town staring at him, confused and uneasy. But Nayland's eyes were calm and sincere. "Come with us," she said softly. "You must hear the full truth." Luke took a slow breath, unsure what waited ahead. But he knew one thing. He had to follow, because whatever something huge Nayland carried, it wasn't a rumor or fear. It was something he deserved to understand. Luke Harper did not know what to expect when Nayland and the Apache elders asked him to follow them. The townspeople whispered behind him, but he ignored their voices. Something in Nayland's expression steadied calm, and Sirius told him that this was important, something he could not walk away from. "Where are we going?" Luke asked quietly as he stepped closer. Nayland looked at him with a gentle firmness. "Not far. Just outside town. We will explain everything." The elder beside her nodded in agreement. Luke glanced back at the ranch hands watching him, then decided to go. He climbed onto Dusty and followed the Apache riders out of the town square, leaving behind all the noise and uncertainty. They rode slowly, taking a small trail that led to an open field near a group of cottonwood trees. The place was peaceful, with tall grass swaying in the breeze and sunlight shining through the leaves. The Apache riders stopped in a circle, and everyone dismounted. Luke stood waiting, unsure. Nayland stepped into the center of the circle and motioned for him to come forward. When he did, the elder who had spoken earlier began to explain. "Luke," Harper the elder said calmly, "you think you simply helped a young woman one night? But your actions created a path we had been unable to find for years." Luke looked confused. "I just did what anyone should do." "No," the elder said gently, "not anyone. Many would have walked past her. Many would have acted out of fear or anger. But you chose respect. You chose protection." Nayland stepped forward, her eyes filled with emotion she tried hard to hide. "My people learned about what you did. The scout who saw you told our leaders. He said you kept watch all night, helped me stand, and did not harm me in any way." That story spread. Luke didn't know what to say. He simply stood there, listening. The elder continued. "Because of your actions, our leaders decided something important. We have been waiting for the right moment to speak with the townspeople, to stop the fighting and begin peace. For many years, attempts failed. There was no trust." Placed a hand over his chest. "But your actions gave us a sign, a story that both sides could believe. A story strong enough to begin peace talks." Luke blinked. "Peace talks?" Nayland nodded. "Yes. The something huge I carry is not a child. It is a peace treaty. A treaty your kindness helped create." Luke stared at her, stunned, not in fear, but in disbelief. Nayland continued softly. "For months, our elders prepared. We met, talked, and planned. But we needed a symbol to present us. Something that showed both sides that trust could exist again." She placed her hands over her stomach, not in a literal way, but in a symbolic one. "I was chosen to present the treaty, because the night you helped me. That was the moment the elders decided peace could be possible." Luke felt his chest tighten. He had never imagined that one simple act of kindness would carry such weight. The elder walked forward with a wrapped bundle made of decorated hide. He placed it gently in Nayland's hands. She turned and extended it toward Luke. "This," she said, "is what I came to show you." Luke opened the bundle carefully. Inside was a rolled parchment tied with braided threads. He slowly unwrapped it, revealing Apache drawings, symbols, and written words, offerings of peace. Shared land routes, promises of safe trade, protection of families, and agreements to end conflict. Luke swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. The elder smiled. "You do not need to say much. Your actions already spoke." Nayland took a slow breath. "My people want you to stand with me when we present this to the town leaders. Your presence will help both sides feel safe. You began this path. We want you there when it becomes real." Luke hesitated. "What if the townspeople don't want peace? What if they blame me? Nayland shook her head. "Oh, some may fear change, but many will listen. You are respected among them. You know your character," the elder added. "We are not asking you to take sides. We are asking you to stand for the truth that kindness can lead to something greater." For years, he had lived quietly, avoiding conflict. He never thought he would be at the center of anything important. But now, he realized, sometimes life chooses people for roles they never expected. He finally nodded. "I'll help." Nayland exhaled in relief, her eyes softening. "Thank you." That afternoon, Luke rode back to town beside Nayland and the elders. The townspeople gathered again, whispering anxiously, but Luke stood tall. He stepped into the center of the square, the peace treaty in hand. The sheriff approached, uncertain. "Luke, what's going on?" Luke looked around at the faces watching him: workers, shopkeepers, ranch families, children holding their mothers' hands. He raised the treaty gently. "They came to offer peace," he said clearly. "And they want us to listen." The townspeople murmured. Some seemed nervous, others seemed hopeful. Nayland then stepped forward. She bowed her head respectfully. "We want safety for our families," she said in simple English. "We want no more fighting. We want peace." The sheriff looked at Luke. "You really trust them?" Luke nodded, slow and steady. "I trust Nayland, and I trust what I saw. They came without weapons. They came in good faith." The mayor, who had been watching from a distance, stepped closer. "Let us read the treaty." The crowd quieted. Luke unrolled the parchment. The mayor read it slowly, his voice steady, carrying across the silent square. The words spoke of fairness, cooperation, shared water sources, open routes for travel, protection for both communities. By the time he finished, the mood in the square had changed. The nervous whispers softened. People looked at one another, considering the possibility of peace after so many years of fear. The sheriff finally nodded. I think we should talk." "True peace. That's something we all want," the mayor agreed. "We will discuss this with open minds." Nayland let out a breath she had been holding for months. The elders bowed their heads in gratitude, and Luke felt something warm spread in his chest: relief, hope, and a quiet pride. Over the next several weeks, meetings were held calm, respectful, and honest. For the first time in decades, Apache leaders and town officials spoke face-to-face without fear. They planned shared grazing paths, water usage, patrol routes, and protection rules. Every meeting began with the story of how Luke found Nayland, protected her without expecting anything in return, and helped her return safely. The story acted like a bridge, bringing people closer, helping them see one another as humans instead of enemies. Luke never tried to lead the meetings, simply stood beside Nayland when needed, offering presence and reassurance. His quiet strength helped keep things calm. Months later, a large gathering was arranged near the river, the same river where Luke and Nayland had rested during their first journey. Families from both sides came together. There were woven blankets, painted horses, handmade pots, and food shared openly between communities. At the center of the gathering, the final peace treaty was signed. The moment was important. Huge not because of politics or power, but because families who had feared each other for generations now stood side by side with hope in their hearts. Nayland presented the final treaty. Luke stood beside her, just as she had asked. As she finished her speech, Nayland turned to Luke and said quietly, so only he could hear that night, "When you helped me, you planted a seed that grew into this day." Luke smiled gently. "I'm glad you made it home," Nayland nodded. "Because you helped me, many more people will now live without fear." The crowd cheered, and a sense of unity washed over the gathering. Luke felt overwhelmed, not by the attention, but by the truth that real change had come from one simple act. He had not fought a battle, given a grand speech, or sought any reward. He had simply protected someone who needed help, and that small moment had grown into something huge. Peace that would last for generations. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky with golden and pink light, Luke realized something important. Sometimes the biggest changes in the world begin with the smallest decisions. And sometimes the strongest stories come from a single night of kindness.